By the time I got there, the lights were already pointing at the killer. At least that's what everyone wanted to believe. It was just after 8 on a cold December night in Bilbao. Christmas crowds packed the square, music leaking from cheap speakers, smell of roasted chestnuts fighting with the stink of wet asphalt. And right in the middle of that postcard, under a huge bronze statue, lay a man in a high-vis vest and a twisted harness, his body awkwardly folded on the stone. Above him, the Christmas lights formed a perfect arrow, a long, bright line of LEDs running from the top of the structure, bending, then pointing hard in one direction, like a giant finger saying, "There, he did it." People were holding up their phones. Some were filming the body. Most were filming the arrow. "Inspector, por aquí," a young Ertzaina called, lifting the tape for me. I ducked under, my knees complaining like they always do in December, and stepped into the circle of white light around the corpse. The victim's name was on his pass. Iker Larori, lighting designer. Mid-40s, beard, work gloves still on. The forensic was already crouched beside him, giving me the look that means, clearly dead, don't ask if we can save him. My jefe de guardia came up next to me, breath steaming in the cold. "Fell from up there," he said, nodding at the steel structure that held the lights. "Harness failed. And look at that." He pointed at the arrow of LEDs. "Dying message, eh? Artist to the end." I followed the arrow with my eyes. It didn't point at random. It pointed straight across the square, to another installation. A smaller, more experimental piece of light art. Under it, a sign with the name of another artist. Maite Sainz. Everyone knew their feud. Even I, who doesn't care about culture news unless someone's been acuchillado, had heard about it. "Open and shut," my jefe muttered. He knew who cut his harness. "He tells us with the lights." Romantic, no? I looked at the body, then at the arrow, then at the crowd beyond the tape, all staring where the lights told them to stare. Too perfect, I thought. Too theatrical. I've been an inspector with the Ertzaintza for almost 30 years. I've seen husbands kill wives and blame burglars, kids push friends off roofs and call it games, businessmen jump before they're thrown. People are messy. Scenes are messy. When something looks this clean, this symbolic, my instinct doesn't relax. It tightens. That night, under those Christmas lights in Bilbao, everything seemed to make sense at first sight. And that was exactly what bothered me. I should introduce myself properly. I'm Inspector Mikel Arriaga, 55 years old, Ertzaintza, homicide and violent crimes, based in Bilbao. I've worked enough Christmas shifts to know most trouble in December comes from alcohol, family reunions, and knives in the kitchen drawer, not from artists and pretty lights. The city had put a lot of money into this Christmas show. A big statue in the middle of the plaza wrapped in LEDs, synchronized light displays, some famous local artists hired to design pieces, tourists, families, selfies. The whole thing was meant to show Bilbao as modern, creative, safe. Now I had a dead lighting artist under the main attraction and an arrow of lights accusing his rival in front of half the city. We started the usual routine. Secure the perimeter, push the crowd back, get the foreigners to do a first visual, check the harness, check the cables, check if anyone saw anything other than the floor and their own phones. The harness looked wrong. I'm not a technician, but I've seen enough industrial accidents to feel when something has been helped along. The strap that should have held Iker's weight was sliced, not frayed. A clean cut, like someone took a blade to it. The forensic kept it simple. Fall from height, she said. Neck and head trauma. Time of death roughly within the last hour, but I'll confirm. No need for more detail. The twisted angle of his head told its own story. The technical team from the contractor stood in a nervous cluster nearby, all branded jackets and worried faces. When I walked over, their foreman, a bulky guy in his 50s, took a step forward. "Inspector, this is a tragedy, he started. Iker, he knew this structure better than anyone. He must have realized who did this. Because of the arrow? I asked. He nodded quickly. They hated each other, he and Maite. Everyone knows. He changed the pattern, Seguro, to point at her. Look, we saw it shift just after the fall. Behind him, a younger man with glasses later, I'd know him as John, the lighting programmer, kept glancing at the main control panel, a metal box with screens and buttons at the edge of the square. You saw him change it? I asked. No, the foreman said. One moment the lights were normal, next moment, this arrow. And then, he gestured helplessly at the forens and the body. On the other side of the square, under the installation the arrow was pointing at, several Ertzainas were talking to a woman wrapped in a dark coat, hair pulled back, jaw clenched. Even from a distance, I recognized her from photos. Maite Science, the rival. Of course she was here. Of course the arrow pointed straight at her work like some cheap detective novel. Paper case, my jefe would call it. You barely need to write the attestado. Dead man accuses enemy with dramatic gesture. We arrest the enemy. Everyone goes home in time for Nochebuena. I walked over to the control panel instead. It was a simple-looking setup, but I knew enough to respect any system that runs thousands of lights in sync. 2 screens showed timing diagrams and patterns. A third had a schedule with hours and names of sequences. John hovered behind me, as if afraid I'd break it by looking too hard. Who has access to this? I asked. Me, mainly, he said. And Iker, of course. Sometimes Mate or the others when they want to test something, but always with us around. His voice was steady, but he kept swallowing. His fingers tapped against his leg, a small, fast rhythm that didn't match the calm words. Show me the arrow, I said. He clicked through menus, opened a pattern file called Arrow Special, and there it was on the preview, the exact shape shining above the square. A long line, then a bend, then the point. And when was this pattern scheduled to run? I asked. He pulled up a log. A list of timestamps and pattern names filled the screen. He pointed. Here, it triggered at 2011, right after the accident. You can see the time. I checked my watch. I checked the forensics note of time of call. I checked my phone, where the first emergency notification had come in. Something itched at the back of my head. Can you scroll up? I said. He did. The logs went back through the evening. Test sequences, normal Christmas loop, sponsor logos. Then, one line in the middle of the list that caught my eye. Same pattern name, same arrow, but a different time. Hours earlier. Why is the arrow pattern here at 1603? I asked. John froze for half a second. It was small, but I built half my career on noticing small freezes. Oh, that was just a test, he said. We were experimenting. At 4 in the afternoon, I said, with a pattern that just happens to accuse the man's rival later tonight. He opened his mouth, closed it again. I don't know, he said finally. Iker was always trying things. Behind us, I could hear my jefe raising his voice at Maite, asking her where she had been and whether she had ever touched the harness. On paper, this was routine, a fall, a feud, a nice little arrow for the judge. But that line in the log wouldn't leave my mind. The arrow had existed hours before Iker supposedly used it as a message. And that was the first moment I knew. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be the simple Christmas tragedy everyone wanted. We started with the obvious villain. That's usually how it goes. Maite Sayens stood under her own installation, a forest of thin metal poles with little spheres of light at the top, like frozen fireflies, pretty in an artificial way. She was still in her black work clothes, jacket zipped to the neck, hands shoved deep in the pockets. Her cheeks were red from the cold, but her eyes weren't wet. My jefe was doing the bulldozer routine. So you admit you argued with him, he said. You insulted him in front of half the crew. You said you wished he'd fall off his precious tower. We have witnesses." Mate looked past him at me as I approached, as if searching for someone who might actually listen. "I said a lot of things," she answered. "So did he. It was about art, not murder." I stepped in. "Inspector Arriaga," I said, showing the placa. "Let's make this simple. Where were you between 8 and 8:15? She didn't hesitate. "Here, with my team. You can ask them, and the families who came early to see the test. We were running the snowfall sequence. It's on video, seguro. People were posting it all over Instagram. That's the thing with modern crime. Before we even start, half the city has already done a rough job of documentation for us." "You had access to his structure?" I asked. "In the afternoon," she said. "We did a walkthrough for the press, but Iker never let me touch his precious rigging. He barely let his own crew touch it." Her jaw tightened when she said his name. There was history there, no doubt. "Everyone says you hated each other," I said. "Hate is a big word," she replied. "We competed. He thought I was a spoiled kid with grants and theory. I thought he was old school and lazy. That's not a motive for this." Behind her, one of her assistants nodded quickly. The rest stared at the ground. "Did you know about the arrow?" I asked. She frowned. "What arrow?" I pointed. She turned, looked up at the giant LED finger accusing her installation, and for the first time, her face really changed. "Not guilty. Angry. That idiot," she muttered. "Even dead, he makes bad art. My jefe seized on it." "So you admit he did it?" She shook her head. "No, I admit it looks like something he'd do. Drama, symbolism." Then she looked back at me. "But it's too neat, Inspector, even for him." I filed that away, the suspect pointing out the same thing that bothered me. It didn't clear her, but it made me listen. We moved the interviews to the commissaria as soon as we could clear the scene. Christmas or not, the paperwork doesn't wait. First came the foreman, Asier, the contractor's man. He sat stiff in the chair, hands folded too neatly. Iker was difficult, he admitted. Perfectionist. But he was the best. We had no safety incidents in all his years. This makes no sense. Who could access his harness? I asked. Technically, only him and the safety officer, he said. But tools are tools. If someone wanted to cut it, they could find a moment. Did you see him argue with Mike today? I pressed. He sighed. They argued almost every day about positioning, brightness. Who got more visibility from the city hall? Normal stuff in this business. Normal. Sure. Who else had problems with him? I asked. Azier hesitated. Just a beat. He pushed the crew hard, he said. Some didn't like it. But that's not the same as wanting him dead. He was protecting someone. I'd seen that pause too many times. Name them anyway, I said. He gave me a list. We would talk to them, but I already knew the real answers weren't going to come from tired electricians. Then there was John, the programmer. In the interview room, he looked even smaller, like the chair might swallow him. You're in charge of the control system, I said. Walk me through who can change what. He launched into a technical explanation. Network, controllers, central server, local overrides. I let him talk himself out. In practice? I cut in. In practice, I handle the schedules and patterns, he said. Iker sits with me sometimes to tweak. Maite and the other artists submit their designs and we implement them. City Hall wants previews. We show them on a test rig. And this arrow pattern, I said, who created it? He looked genuinely confused for a second. I don't know. It's labeled as an Iker custom. Could be him. Could be a template we modified. You told me at the scene it activated at 2011, I said. But the log shows an earlier activation too, at 1603. Why? He licked his lips. We tested it, he said. Maybe I forgot to delete the log. It happens. We try things. We undo them later. I let the silence stretch. In those gaps, people show you who they are. John, I said finally, you do realize that if this arrow was tested at 4 in the afternoon, it can't be a spontaneous dying message from a man who fell at 8. He stared at the table. I didn't kill him, he whispered. I didn't say you did, I replied. But someone used your system to tell a story that doesn't match the timeline. And you're the one who understands that system best. He didn't look up. He just nodded slightly, like a man accepting that the noose is somewhere in the room, even if it's not around his neck yet. Our last key witness that night was Arantxa Ibar, the city's cultural officer. She arrived at the commissaria in a tailored coat and a cloud of expensive perfume, clearly upset more by the PR disaster than by the death. This is a catastrophe for the city, she said before I even asked a question. Do you realize how many journalists are calling? The mayor is furious. We were celebrating creativity, and now we have this. A dead man, I said. We have a dead man, she sighed. Of course. Poor Iker. Terrible accident. Who said it was an accident? I asked. She froze for half a second. There it was again, that same tiny pause I'd seen in Azier and John for different reasons. Well, I assumed, she recovered. Artists, height, equipment, these things happen. It's a crime scene, I said. His harness was cut. Her eyes widened just enough to make me suspect that she already knew. Cut? By whom? That's what we're trying to find out, I said. Tell me about the tension between him and Mate. Arantxa launched into a rehearsed speech about creative differences, media noise, how rivalry is healthy for the arts. It sounded like something written for a festival brochure, not a police statement. And the contract? I asked. How much did the city pay for this show? She looked offended. What does that have to do with anything? Everything has to do with everything, I said. Humor me. She gave me a range of numbers and talked about tenders, transparency, public interest. Too fast, too defensive. Nothing concrete, lots of air. By the end of the interview, I knew 2 things. She was very worried about the narrative in the press, and she wanted a villain that wasn't her department. A jealous rival artist fit nicely. Some boring technical scandal did not. Back at my desk, I pulled all the threads together, and they still refused to make a neat knot. On the whiteboard, we had Ike here, dead, in the center. Lines went out to May T, rival, John, programmer, Azier, foreman, Arantxa, city hall. Next to each name, my usual quick notes: motive, opportunity, lies. Maite, visible hatred, but strong alibi and too obvious. John, access, nervous, something off with the logs. Azier, loyal to Iker professionally, protective of crew. Arantxa, image obsessed, defensive about money, wants quick solution. The arrow of lights was supposed to simplify things. Instead, it made everything more complicated. I sent a request to forensics, full analysis of the harness, every fiber, looking for tool marks. I wanted to know what kind of blade cut it, how clean the cut was, whether it was done in one go or several. People think that's overkill. It isn't. Tools tell stories when mouths don't. Then I called it. I want a full copy of the lighting system backups, I said. All configs, all logs, from the start of the installation to tonight. And I want them stored on our servers, not the contractors. There was a small pause on the other end. That's a lot of data, Inspector. Christmas came early, I said. Do it. When I walked back past the holding rooms, John looked up as I passed. He'd been sitting with a coffee, staring at the wall. You're copying the system, aren't you? He asked quietly through the open door. Yes, I said. Is that a problem? He swallowed. No. Just, you'll see things that don't mean what you think they mean. That's true of most things in my job, I replied. Later that night, I watched the first batch of CCTV from the square. Cameras on lampposts, shop fronts, a bank across the street. Grainy, bad angles, but better than nothing. At 20:09, Eicher was still up on the structure, moving along the rigging like he'd done 100 times. At 20:10, he slipped or was pushed, or trusted a harness that wouldn't hold. At 20:11, the pattern on the statue changed, and the arrow came to life. On the video, you could see heads turn all at once, not toward the falling man, but toward the lights. That's what people are trained to look at now. The show, not the reality. I froze the footage and zoomed on the top of the structure. The resolution wasn't good enough to see details. Just a shape moving, then gone. But something else bothered me. At 20:06, just for a couple of seconds, the lights flickered not off, but into a different pattern, then back. Too fast for most people to notice. Not too fast for a control system log. It matched a line I'd seen earlier in the data. A quick override, then restoration of the schedule. Someone testing, or someone nervous. People lie with words, with faces, with silence. I see it every day. But systems lie differently. They leave traces of the lie. They can't help it. The official story settling in around us was simple. Heated artistic rivalry, impulsive sabotage, poetic accusation in LEDs. City Hall liked it. The press would love it. But the log said the arrow had been alive hours before Eicher fell. The cameras said the pattern change, and the fall didn't line up the way everyone claimed. And my gut said this was less about art and more about something uglier. I leaned back in my chair, rubbed my eyes, and felt the weight of another long winter case settling on my shoulders. This wasn't a dying message. It was a script, and someone with access to power, both electrical and political, had written it. The question now wasn't just who cut the harness. It was, who needed Maite to be the villain so badly they used the Christmas lights of Bilbao to frame her in front of the whole city? The next morning, the case stopped being about a dead artist and started being about my career. At 8 sharp, I was in my Jefe's office, watching him rub his temples as if the headache was my fault. The mayor called, he said. Twice. City Hall wants results, Mikkel. The press is already saying, sabotage, terror, Christmas show of death, you know how it goes. I sat down without being asked. We'll have results when we have the truth, I said, not when the mayor's communications team gets nervous. He gave me a tired look. Don't be dramatic. We have a clear suspect, the rival, the arrow, the history. If this goes to court tomorrow, they'll eat it up. If it goes to court tomorrow, we'll be lying, I said. The arrow was tested hours before the fall. The timeline doesn't match a dying message. Someone set it up. And who would do that, he asked. The programmer boy, the culture lady? Come on, Mikkel. Don't invent a conspiracy because you don't like an easy answer. I leaned forward. I've been in this job long enough to know that when something is this convenient, there's usually money underneath. I want to see the contracts, procurement, invoices, all of it. He grimaced. You're going to make friends in City Hall. I'm too old to start making friends now, I said. He sighed, then nodded, like a man signing a risky loan. Fine. But keep me informed, and keep your theories to yourself when you talk to anyone with a title above inspector. Understood? Entendido, jefe. As I left his office, I knew one thing. From that moment, I wasn't just working a homicide. I was walking into politics. I hate politics. Getting the contract details took half the day and a favor from an old colleague in the economic crimes unit. We sat in the small cafeteria downstairs, plastic coffee between us, and he slid a folder over. Christmas show. 3-year framework, plus this year's extras, he said. On paper, Everything is beautiful. Competitive, tender, transparency, all the buzzwords. And off paper? I asked. He shrugged. Off paper, I see inflated invoices, reused equipment billed as new, and consultancy fees that smell like gifts. Nothing you can prove with one glance, but enough to keep you busy. I flipped through the photocopies, numbers, signatures, stamps. My eyes aren't what they used to be, but even I could see the pattern. Same contractor getting add-ons without competition, same approvals from the same small group at City Hall, including one name I already knew. Arantexi Ibar. Did Iker know about this? I asked. My colleague hesitated. Unofficially, he came to us a couple of weeks ago, said he had questions about how materials were being billed, wanted to know if what he was seeing was normal. We told him to put it in writing if he had evidence. He never did. Did you register a complaint? I said. He shook his head. No formal denunciation, no file, just a conversation. I didn't think he'd end up under a statue, you know. No one ever does, I said. So, Iker had started pulling on the same thread I was now holding. 2 weeks later, he was dead in the middle of his own light show with an arrow blaming his rival. The story was shifting. In rivalries, people shout and throw things. In contract fraud, people get very calm, very polite, and sometimes people fall from heights. Back in the office, the forensic report on the harness was waiting on my email. The cut was clean. One slice, sharp blade, no hesitation. Done before the fall, obviously. No signs of wear, no manufacturing defect. Whoever did it knew exactly which strap to cut so the harness would still look intact until weight was put on it. It wasn't improvisation, it was planning. I read that line twice. Planning plus money plus convenient narrative equals something I've seen too many times. Corruption with body count. I called for John again. He looked more tired than before, like he hadn't slept. He sat down carefully, as if the chair might accuse him too. We pulled backups of the system, I said. Our techs went through them. There are some interesting edits. He swallowed. Edits? On the day of the incident, at 15:47, someone with admin access modified the schedule, I said. They inserted the arrow pattern to trigger on a conditional input manual override from the console. Then at 16:03, they did a quick test. Arrow on, arrow off. After that, they set it so the arrow would replace whatever pattern was running with one button. He stared at the table. His fingers twitched. Only 2 users have that level of access, I continued. You and Iker. And Iker was up on the structure at the time, not at the console. Silence. Long, heavy. I didn't kill him, John said finally, but this time it sounded less like a denial and more like a prayer. Who asked you to set up the arrow? I asked. He shook his head. Nobody. It was just an experiment. I leaned in. Look, I don't need a confession for murder from you. For murder, I have tool marks, opportunity, and messages you haven't heard yet. What I need from you is the truth about those changes. Because right now, the system logs say you prepared the perfect frame-up from 8 hours before Iker's death. His jaw worked. His eyes were shiny. You don't understand how it works, he said weakly. That's exactly why we brought in our own people, I replied. So I would understand. And they tell me this. An override like that isn't a test. It's a trap. He closed his eyes, just for a second. When he opened them, there was anger there. Not at me, but at the situation. Do you know what happens to a contractor if City Hall is unhappy, Inspector? He said softly. We disappear. They pick another one. We get blamed for delays, overruns, whatever narrative they need. We're the face. They're the hand pulling the money. Who is they? I asked. He looked at the camera in the corner of the room, at the mirror, at everything except me. Then he shut down again, lips pressed tight. I knew that look. It said, "I'm scared of someone who isn't sitting in this room." That evening, when I left the commissariat, the air was sharper, and not just from the cold. I walked to my car parked across the street. The windshield was fogged. At first, I thought it was condensation. Then I saw it. Someone had left a piece of harness under the wiper. Neatly cut, about 20 centimeters long, the buckle still attached. It wasn't from the actual evidence we'd had that in sealed bags all day, but it was close enough. There was nothing else. No note, no spray paint, no broken window. Just that silent reminder, we know what you're looking at. I stood there for a moment, feeling that familiar mixture of anger and adrenaline. Then I bagged the strap like any other piece of evidence and locked the car. Whoever left it wanted me to feel seen. Good. A visible threat is better than an invisible one. At least you know from which direction the wind is coming. Driving home, I checked the rearview mirror more often than usual. One small hatchback stayed behind me longer than I liked. When I turned off the main road suddenly, it continued straight. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe not. In this line of work, paranoia isn't a disorder. It's part of the job description. 2 days into the case, the media had already convicted Métis. "Jealous artist kills rival," the headlines screamed. Talk shows replayed clips of their arguments at openings, comments taken out of context and turned into motive. People love stories where emotion explains everything. It makes them feel safe. You can avoid jealousy. You can't avoid a system that decides you're inconvenient. Inside the commissariat, the pressure rose in sync with the news cycle. My jefe called me in again. "City Hall wants a statement," he said. "They want us to confirm we have a suspect in custody. They don't say who, but they mean her. Are we charging her or not?" "No," I said. "Her alibi holds. The technical evidence doesn't support the theory that Eicher left a message. And now I have a financial motive for other people." "Mikkel," he warned, "if you force me to arrest her just to calm the mayor, you're asking me to falsify a case," I said. "I'm not doing that. If that's a problem, put it in writing." He stared at me for a long moment, then exhaled. "You're going to give me an ulcer. Fine. You have 48 hours. After that, if you don't have something solid, they'll take it away from you and give it to someone more flexible." I nodded. "Then I'll work fast." The major break came from an unexpected place. Eicher's laptop. His family handed it over reluctantly. They were still in shock, and the last thing they wanted was some inspector pawing through his files. But they signed the consent, and our techs cracked it in a few hours. Hidden in a folder, disguised as old projects, there was a set of scans. Invoices, delivery notes, internal emails forwarded from the contractor's office. Some of the documents had his handwritten notes in the margin. Same lights billed twice. Old stock. Why city approval so fast? One email thread in particular caught my eye. It was between a manager at the contractor and Aranza. The tone was very friendly, almost intimate. They joked about making the numbers sparkle like the lights and about not wanting auditors under the Christmas tree this year. At the end of one message, Aranza had written, "As long as Eicher doesn't make noise, we're safe. Keep him happy." He hadn't stayed happy. He'd gathered evidence. He'd gone to my colleagues in economic crimes for advice. And then, right in the middle of the city's most visible project, he died in a way that conveniently redirected all attention to a stupid artistic feud. I printed that email and pinned it on the whiteboard next to her name. The story clicked into place. Eicher had become a threat, not to Maite's ego, but to Aranza's deals. Someone needed him silenced and someone else blamed. The arrow was never his voice, it was theirs. The remaining question was John. I went back over the phone records we'd pulled. Lots of calls between him and the contractor, normal. Some between him and Eicher, normal. And a pattern that wasn't normal. Late-night calls between John and Aranza in the weeks before the show. Not many, but regular, too regular to be technical support. They also shared a location ping one night at a bar, far from the city center. My younger colleagues love this part data. Maps, red dots. Me, I just see people who think phones don't tell stories. They do. So now I had a dead man with evidence, a city official with motive, and a programmer in the middle with access to both code and cables. I requested one more thing, all bank movements for the contractor's account and John's personal one, with the proper orders and paperwork. It would take time I didn't really have. While I waited, I made a decision. If John was going to talk, it wouldn't be in a gray interview room with a camera blinking in the corner. Some people only open up when the walls change. That night, I called him. "John, it's Inspector Arriaga," I said. "I'm not calling from the station. I want to meet." Silence, then. "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet," I said, "but you're running out of space. Meet me at the plaza. 1 hour, under the statue." He hesitated. "Why there?" "Because that's where all this started," I said. "And because, if I'm right, that's where you'll finally understand you're not the only one who's been used." He came. I knew he would. Guilt and fear pull people stronger than summons sometimes. I got there early. The square was quieter than the first night, but the lights were still on, business as usual. The statue towered above, wrapped in LEDs, innocent to anyone who didn't know better. I stood in the shadow of the structure, hands in my coat pockets, feeling the steel above me like a weight. I wasn't wired officially, but my phone was recording in my pocket. Old dog, old tricks. When I saw John walking toward me, shoulders hunched, eyes darting around just in case someone else was watching, I knew the next hour would decide whether this case was going to be a clean file or a career-ending mess. I stepped forward out of the shadow of the statue and met him under the same Christmas lights that had once pointed at the wrong killer. "John," I said, "it's time you tell me who really cut that harness." John stopped about 2 meters from me, under the statue, under the same coil of lights that had turned a plaza into a stage. He looked up at the structure, then at me. His breath came out in small white puffs. "You picked a nice place for a chat," he said. "I wanted you to see your work," I answered. "It's good, by the way." "Technically." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Yeah, technically." I let the silence sit for a moment. People walked on the edges of the square, taking photos, drinking, pretending this was just another Christmas. "John," I said, "I'm going to tell you what I know. You can correct me where I'm wrong. But if you lie to me now, I won't be able to help you later. Entendido?" He nodded once. "Iker started looking into the contracts," I began. "He saw old lights billed as new, numbers doubled, tripled. He collected documents. He spoke to my colleagues in economic crimes. And he spoke to you, didn't he? About the system, about what was really installed." John swallowed. He asked questions, he admitted. He was curious, angry. "Then there's Aranza," I continued. "The friendly emails, the jokes about auditors, the late-night calls to your phone, always after meetings with the contractor. You and her, having drinks in a bar in Deusto, not exactly an official briefing." He looked away. "We were seeing each other. Sometimes. It wasn't serious." "It was serious enough for her to ask you for favors," I said. "Technical ones. Adjust this, hide that, make the old hardware look like a new miracle in front of cameras. Right?" His shoulders dropped a little. "Nobody got hurt," he muttered. "It was numbers, screenshots, that's all." "Until Iker wouldn't shut up," I said. "Until he became a problem instead of just a difficult artist. And that's when someone asked you a different kind of favor." I took a folded sheet from my pocket and held it up. Bank transfer, 10,000 euros, from a consultancy firm that doesn't exist outside a mailbox to your account. 1 week before the show. You don't make that much programming Christmas lights. He closed his eyes. You got the banks already? Yes, I said. And I have the system logs, the ones where you prepared the arrow pattern at 1547, tested it at 1603, set it so it would override whatever was running with one button. You can tell me it was an experiment, but the timing says otherwise. So does the harness. He flinched at the word. John, I don't need you for the technical story anymore, I said softly. I can prove you did those changes without your help. What I need you for is the human story. Who cut that harness? Who told you to point the city at might while Iker fell? For a long moment, all I could hear was the low hum of the lights and distant traffic. Then he spoke, voice thin but steady. It wasn't supposed to go like that, he said. That's what everyone says, I know, but it's true. At the start, it was just showmanship, a way to control the narrative if something happened. What does that mean? I asked. He hugged himself as if the cold had finally reached his bones. When Iker started talking about going public, Arantxa panicked. She said he'd ruin everything, that years of work would collapse, that people would lose jobs. She said he was unstable, that nobody would believe him if he looked obsessed or vindictive. So she wanted a way to discredit him, I said. He nodded. She asked me, hypothetically, if the lights could tell a story if needed. Like, imagine there's a small incident, a loose cable, a scare. Could we make it look like the rival set him up? Plant doubt about his mental state? She didn't say, we're going to kill him. She never said that. She just talked about narrative. People like her never say the ugly words, I replied. They hire others to do it. He stared up at the statue. She suggested the arrow, he said quietly. Said it would be poetic. The old guard accusing the new, or the other way around, whatever played better. I thought it was disgusting. I told her no. Then the contractor's manager called me. He was more direct. Acier? I asked. He shook his head. No, higher. The one who signs, not the one who climbs. He said the city was paying a lot, that we all needed this project. He said I'd be taken care of. He didn't talk about harnesses either. Just about making sure if there was trouble, it didn't splash the wrong people. So you set up the override, I said. I did, he admitted. I told myself it was just pixels. Just a pattern. If nothing happened, nothing happened. If there was some staged drama, worst case, the rival got bad press. It was already happening anyway. He paused. When he spoke again, his voice cracked. I didn't know they were going to cut the harness, he said. Not until it was too late. Who did? I asked. He hesitated. Acier knew, he finally said. He knew something. He had a meeting with the manager and then spent extra time checking the rigging alone. One of the younger guys joked that he'd never seen him so interested in safety before. I didn't want to hear it at the time. You didn't see him cut it, I said. I didn't want to see anything, he replied. I told myself they were just going to scare him, make him slip, maybe hurt himself a bit, so he'd think twice before making noise. People say stupid things in those circles. A small accident. A reminder. You convince yourself they're just words. And the night of the show? I asked. He rubbed his face with both hands. I was at the console when it happened. I saw him up there on the camera. Then the screen flickered. The power dipped for a second normal, with all this load, and then someone shouted. I looked up, saw him fall. I froze. For a second, I forgot everything. Then my radio crackled. It was the manager. He said, "Button, now." And you pressed it, I said. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The arrow came on, everyone turned their heads, and the story wrote itself, I said. He nodded slowly. I thought if I didn't press it, if I refused, they'd know I wasn't with them anymore. And if they could do that to him, what would they do to me? Or my family? I panicked. I chose the wrong fear. We stood there for a moment, both looking at the lights that had been his instrument and his cage. Who left the piece of harness on my car? I asked. He actually looked surprised. What? I didn't. I'm not suicidal. So that was someone else. Maybe a warning from the contractor. Maybe some idiot trying to be clever. Another unanswered question for the file. John, I said, this is how it's going to go. You'll come with me now officially. You'll give a full statement. You'll help us get recordings, documents, whatever ties Aranza and the contractor to the decisions that led to this. You'll still face charges. Accessory, at least. But if you keep playing dumb, they'll hang the whole thing on you and walk away clean. Is that what you want? He shook his head, eyes wet. No. Then walk with me, I said. He did. The rest wasn't cinematic. Most real climaxes aren't. They're paperwork and long hours and lawyers breathing down your neck. With John's statement and the tech evidence, we set up a controlled call between him and Aranza. He called her from a monitored line, voice shaking just enough to sound natural. They're digging into the system, he said. Into the payments, into the arrow. I can't hold it together. On the recording, you can hear her sigh. Calm down, she said. Stick to the story. Artistic tension, freak accident. If you start improvising, you'll make it worse. What about what we agreed? John pushed. About using the arrow, about making it look like Maite. Don't say that on the phone, she snapped. Then softer. We all did what we had to do. Nobody wanted him dead. He chose to be difficult. If he had kept quiet, we would still be celebrating. Now we contain the damage. Understood? That sentence was enough for the prosecutor. After that, economic crimes raided the contractor's offices. They found the fake consultancy, the double billing, the rest of the puzzle pieces. Azier tried to play the loyal worker who knew nothing, but one of the younger crew members flipped and talked about extra safety checks and strange instructions. It took weeks, not hours. John was formally arrested, then offered a deal in exchange for testimony. Aranza was suspended, then charged with corruption, fraud, and complicity in manslaughter. The contractor's manager faced similar charges. Azier eventually admitted he'd weakened the harness on orders, insisting he thought it would only cause a scare. They all blamed someone else, of course. That's the circle. Responsibility is always one step away, just out of reach. Maite was officially cleared. No charges, no criminal record. But her name had been dragged through headlines long enough that some people would always connect her with that Christmas death in Bilbao. Sponsors get nervous around scandal, even when you're proven innocent. The stain stays on the cheaper fabric. On paper, the case closed nicely. Multiple arrests. A neat web of corruption exposed. Press conferences with serious faces and big words. Transparency, accountability, lessons learned. Off paper, it was messier. Some higher up in City Hall quietly retired, full pension intact. The contractor dissolved and re-emerged under a different name 6 months later. Money has a way of changing only its costume. When the trial finally happened, I testified. I walked the court through the timeline, the system logs, the harness analysis, the emails, the recordings. The defense lawyers tried to paint me as an old cynic, seeing conspiracies in every flicker of light. Maybe they were right, but the evidence spoke louder than my personality. John took the stand too. He looked smaller than ever in the formal suit, but he spoke clearly. He didn't cry. He explained how he'd been pulled, step by step, from small favors to bigger ones, until just a pattern became press the button that completes a murder. He got a reduced sentence. Enough years to think, not enough to erase him. When I look at the file, I still don't know if justice was served or if we just balanced the books. Arantxa fought harder. She denied everything, blamed subordinates, claimed the recordings were taken out of context. In the end, the court convicted her on the financial charges easily and found enough to tie her to the decisions that led to Eicher's death, even if she never touched a blade. She appealed. Last I checked, she was still fighting in higher courts, as people with good lawyers tend to do. Azier went to prison. He'll probably come out an old man and tell himself he was just following orders. And me? I went back to work. Another case, another file, another family asking for answers I could only half give them. That's the rhythm. You don't get closure, you get conclusions with signatures. But this one stuck with me more than most. Not because of the fall itself. I've seen worse ways to die. Not because of the corruption. That's like humidity here. Always present, sometimes more visible than others. It stayed with me because of the arrow. People love the idea of a dying message. It feels pure. The last word from the victim, reaching out from beyond to point at the guilty. It gives them comfort, the idea that truth has a built-in alarm. In this case, the message wasn't from the dead man at all. It was from the people who killed him. They used his own lights to tell their version of the story, and the city believed it instantly because it was dramatic and easy and looked good on screens. That's what still bothers me. Not just that they cut his harness, but that they almost got away with cutting the truth the same way. We like to think lies are clumsy, that they trip over themselves. But the most dangerous lies are elegant. They fit what we already want to see. John once asked me during a break in a hearing if I thought he was a monster. No, I told him, you're not special enough for that. You're just a man who picked the wrong moment to be a coward. He nodded. I don't know if that helped him or made it worse. Every December, the city still hangs lights. Different contractors now, different designs, more controls and audits on paper. People bring their kids, drink hot chocolate, post photos with little hearts and stars. Sometimes the lights form shapes. Arches, snowflakes, shooting stars. Once, a few years after the case, I walked through a side street and saw a simple line of LEDs with a bend and a point, directing the crowd toward a market stall. Just an arrow. Just a practical thing, telling you where the churros were. Most people saw that. A bit of fun, a bit of guidance. I saw something else. I saw how easy it is to point a city at whoever you want if you control where they look. If you give them a story simple enough, bright enough, they'll follow it without question, even if the real guilt is standing in the shadows just outside the light. I stopped for a second, watched people laugh and move in the direction the arrow told them to. Then I turned the other way and walked home. Some files you close in the system, others you carry with you every time the Christmas lights go on and everyone looks up, never down.